We think we have a time management or an attention management problem, but underneath, there may be some sort of internal trigger that's driving us, which is hopeful because it means we can learn to notice what that internal trigger or those feelings might be. Instead of blindly reacting to them, we can actually solve for the issue more at the root. We can pause and ask, what's really driving me right now? What am I avoiding? What do I need? Welcome to Oxygen for Educators. I'm one of your hosts, Michelle Kinder. It's our hope to bring you thought-provoking, unscripted conversations full of actionable ideas to fuel your important work in the world. Thanks for tuning in. This space is for you. Hey everyone, this is Michelle Kinder, and welcome back to our series, Radical Hope, Inner Work with a Ripple Effect. Today, we're diving into attention management for mental health. We're going to explore how what you focus on shapes your inner world, it shapes your relationships, and ultimately it shapes the life you live. Now, disclaimer, we hear a lot about attention management in the context of productivity, like hacks to get things done faster or get more done in the day or what have you. But that is not what we're talking about today. That framing can actually work against our mental health. Attention management can also be about well-being. It doesn't have to be about efficiency. At its core, attention management is a collection of behaviors that help us notice our inner state, including our nervous system state, and then consciously shift toward what serves us best instead of just getting taken away by a current. It matters because where your attention goes, your life follows. The psychologist William James, who's often referred to as the father of modern psychology, put it this way. He said, "My experience is what I agree to attend to." So let's just pause for that. Your entire lived experience, the way that your life feels, the meaning you make, the relationships you cherish or struggle with, all of those things are profoundly shaped by what you choose to notice moment by moment. Jon Kabat-Zinn offers a definition to mindfulness that at the end of the day is all about managing our attention. He defines mindfulness as paying attention in a particular way, on purpose, in the present moment, and non-judgmentally. The practice of being intentional about where we put our attention can feel both ordinary and profound. Attention is something we're already doing all day long. Mindfulness and attention management simply invite us to notice how we're paying attention. Is it on autopilot, pulled by every distraction? Or is it more intentional and really helping us create the life we want for ourselves and the people or the causes we care about? Here's another way to think about it. Imagine a flashlight. Wherever you point the beam is what gets illuminated. The rest tends to fade into the background. That's also how our attention works. If the flashlight is constantly darting around because of notifications or worries or other people's demands, then our inner world feels scattered and anxious. But when we steady the beam, choosing where to aim the flashlight, choosing what gets our attention and our energy, our nervous system has a chance to settle. Thinking a bit more about this metaphor, the flashlight is in your hand. It's in my hand. We may not control everything happening around us, but we do have some say in where we aim that beam. We have a say in what gets our attention, moment to moment, day to day, and that can transform everything about our lives in a surprisingly short amount of time. So if we put all of that together, here's a working definition for today. Attention management is the art of noticing where our mental flashlight is pointing, understanding the impact that has on our nervous system and inner state, and then choosing gently and intentionally where to shine it next. So this is not about perfection, but it is about moment to moment shifting a little bit more toward what restores us, connects us, and gives our life meaning. Flowing from wherever we put our attention is, of course, our actions. The book Indistractable, How to Control Your Attention and Choose Your Life, introduces two directions our actions take us. They either take us toward traction or they take us toward distraction. The author defines traction as any action that pulls us toward our deepest values and goals. It's aligned with what we truly want. Distraction, on the other hand, is any action that pulls us away. Here's an important thing. Distraction isn't defined by the activity itself. It's defined by whether it moves us closer to or further from our intentions. If you think about it, reading a novel in the evening could be traction if rest and joy are what you are intending. But if your real intention in that moment was to help your child with homework, that same action becomes distraction. Answering work emails at 10 p.m. might feel productive, but if your value is family time, then in that moment, it's actually distraction. I'll just repeat to drive the point home. Distraction isn't defined by the activity itself. It's defined by whether it moves us closer to or further from our intentions. The same action can be either traction or distraction, depending on the context and how the choice is either serving us or undermining us. The book also zeroes in on a provocative claim, the notion that time management is pain management. Distraction almost always begins with some sort of discomfort. We might feel restless or anxious, bored or overwhelmed, and so we reach for something quick to soothe that inner state. It could be social media, another snack, checking email for the 100th time. We think we have a time management or an attention management problem, but underneath, there may be some sort of internal trigger that's driving us, which is hopeful because it means we can learn to notice what that internal trigger or those feelings might be. Instead of blindly reacting to them, we can actually solve for the issue more at the root. We can pause and ask, what's really driving me right now? What am I avoiding? What do I need? Or can I name this unease I'm carrying? Just yesterday, I caught myself picking up my phone for like the 10th time. And on the surface, it looked like habit or distraction. But when I paused and I asked myself, what's really driving me right now? I realized I was feeling anxious about a situation that felt combative. It was something I needed to close the loop on and take more charge of instead of letting it sprawl across my entire mental landscape. my brain didn't want to sit with that discomfort. So I went searching for relief on autopilot. In that moment, naming the discomfort gave me a little more space, a little more maneuverability. It took the heat out of it. So instead of grasping for distraction, I could take a breath, remind myself how I wanted to show up for that exchange, regardless of how the other person showed up. And then I was able to mentally put that issue in its place. I determined that it made sense for it to take about 5% of my mental load, but no more. Prior to doing that exercise, which just took a few seconds, it was really taking up like 60% of my mental load. So that made a huge difference on what was available to me just from that short reflection. So now let's take a minute for you. Is there something in your life that you're giving way too much mental load to? Maybe a coworker who takes up more space in your head than you wish, or perhaps a family member, a home repair issue, or even the relentless weight of today's political landscape. It's useful to acknowledge the unease, to name it, and then almost dispassionately assess how much of my brain and heart space does this actually get to take up. It's a sense of agency that you're claiming. So life doesn't just get to happen to you. You put yourself back in the driver's seat on how you're going to interact with all the different stressors in your life. A tool that I use that really makes a difference in navigating this internal landscape and what might be happening that causes me to lean further in the direction of distraction instead of traction are discernment questions that I learned from Suzanne Stabile. They're very simple, but they cut right to the heart of attention management. And I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that I think about these questions multiple times a day. The first, what is mine to do and what is not mine to do? The second, what is mine to say and what is not mine to say? And the third can hit people harsh when they first hear it, but we'll talk about that. What is mine to care about and what is not mine to care about? What those questions do for me is they help me right size my attention. They remind me that not everything that crosses my mind or lands in my inbox deserves equal space in my heart or in my mind. Some things are mine to do or mine to say or mine to care about, but many things are not. At first, it can feel cold not to give equal attention to all the hurts in the world. But if we try, we end up in a metaphorical or sometimes literal fetal position. Discernment isn't about shutting our hearts down. It's about knowing what is ours to do, to say, and to care about, and having the space in our lives to open our hearts up to those things. When we honor that boundary, our energy amplifies. We become more effective at the work our individual soul came here to do. But if we try to be all things to all people, we end up impotent, scattered, and ineffective. So let's turn our attention back to the book Indistractable. The author distinguishes internal and external triggers. Internal triggers are what we have been talking about, those feelings underneath, the boredom, the stress, the the loneliness that might push us to escape. External triggers are sometimes the more obvious ones: the buzzing phone, the email notification, the colleague popping in. Most of us blame external triggers when we're struggling with attention or time management. But research shows it's really the internal ones that trip us up the most. Because even if you silence every notification, if you don't deal with what's happening inside, your brain will find something else to latch onto in an effort to soothe your anxiety or whatever that internal trigger is bringing alive in you. So this connects beautifully to what we know about the nervous system. If I'm dysregulated, my focus scatters. If I'm feeling safe and connected, I have more capacity for traction. Traction requires that we actually know what matters to us and that we plan time for us and those things that we've decided matter. So you can imagine if the definition of traction is moving toward your values or your intentions, if you've never done the work of figuring out what your values or intentions are, it's basically impossible to have traction. Traction, again, I'll say it, requires that we know what matters to us, and then we have to plan time for it. In today's world, if we don't protect our time and our energy, it won't be protected. So if rest matters to you, block time for it. If friendships matter, block time for them. If creativity matters, block time for it. Otherwise, everything can be confused for traction or distraction because there's nothing concrete we've committed to in the first place. External triggers are powerful forces too, and the powers that be in 2025 are getting more and more sophisticated at capturing and keeping your attention because it literally translates into dollars and power for them. There is no benevolent force that is going to create the conditions for our mental health to thrive. We have to do it, even if it feels counterculture, because actually it is countercultural in our day to protect our mental health and to protect our attention. Nir Eyal, who is the author of Indistractable, suggests what he calls hacking back by unsubscribing, turning off notifications, or creating tech-free zones. And you've heard me talk about this too in previous episodes. Those small acts are powerful because they protect your attention from being constantly hijacked toward the end of manic or panic, which calms down those internal triggers, which makes us less likely to reach for distraction to soothe our anxiety, and on it goes. So they're in relationship with each other and in loops. Sometimes we need a little extra structure, and Eyal calls this pre-commitments or pacts. These are decisions we make in advance to reduce temptation. A lot of people have agreements with themselves like, I don't bring my phone into the bedroom, or they use an app that locks them out of social media during a time that they need to be focused on something they care about, like writing or family or whatever it is. That takes it out of the willpower zone, and it helps you design an environment that supports traction. And that moves you toward a life that's centered around what you value and care about. Another favorite takeaway from this book is what Eyal calls the identity shift. He suggests that we start to see ourselves not as people constantly struggling with distraction, but as people who have carefully built a life that makes us indistractable. When I say, I'm the kind of person who chooses where my attention goes, it creates a new sense of possibility, and it makes me a creator in my own life instead of a victim. Even if we still get pulled off track sometimes, and we probably all do every single day, we can return more quickly if we've baked this commitment into our identity. So now let's layer in one more important nuance. Not all distraction is bad. Distraction can even be restorative. So a key question to discern the difference between distraction that's moving us away from what we value or distraction that can be restorative is the question, how do I feel afterward? If I scroll endlessly and I find myself feeling foggy or more restless, that's a clue to me that that activity was not restorative. But if I plop down on the couch to binge a show that is completely absorbing and I come back from that experience feeling refreshed, that so-called distraction has actually restored my capacity for more traction because it fueled me to then step back in and focus on what matters. So to sum it up, let me highlight a few big ideas from this book, Indistractable, that we've already covered, just to go over them again. The first is that traction versus distraction is about alignment with values, not about the activity itself. Traction requires clarity of values and then planning around them. And not all distraction is bad. You just need to pay attention to how you feel after you engage in the different parts of your day. The next point is that time management is often pain management. Distraction can show up to indirectly soothe discomfort or unease. You can make all the right moves removing external triggers, but if you don't attend to the internal triggers, you are likely to stay frustrated or keep finding ways to undermine your ideal life. The third point I want to reiterate is that pre-commitments help us protect what matters. And lastly, we can begin to see ourselves as indistractable people, capable of choosing where our attention goes. For me, all of this is a radical hope practice, to believe that even in a noisy, demanding world, we can reclaim our focus, not to do more, but to live a more aligned, present, and meaningful life. The next layer of attention management that I want to cover comes from David Emerald's 3 vital questions. The very first question is, where are you putting your focus? It sounds simple, but it's incredibly powerful because where we put our focus ends up setting off a whole chain reaction inside of us. Emerald uses the acronym FISBE, F-I-S-B-E, to explain this. F stands for focus. He says, where we put our focus drives our inner state, the I-S in FISBE. Where I put my focus drives my inner state. My inner state drives my behavior, and my behavior creates my lived experience. So what starts as something tiny, where I put my mental flashlight, cascades into how I feel, how I act, and what my life looks like over time. Let's make this practical. Imagine 2 different mornings. In the first, your focus is on everything that's going wrong, the traffic, the emails piling up, the conversations you're dreading. Your inner state becomes anxious and tight and constricted. And that leads to reactive behavior, like snapping at a coworker or avoiding something important. And that experience creates more stress and more disconnection. Second morning, your focus is on outcomes. What do I want to bring to this day? What's one thing that matters most? That focus creates a very different inner state, one of enthusiasm and excitement, grounded and hopeful. That inner state leads to different behavior. Perhaps you take a breath before responding. You ask a curious question instead of shutting down. And all of that creates an experience of more presence and more possibility. It's the same circumstances, the same person, but one morning, that person points the flashlight at the problems, and the other morning, she points the flashlight at her preferred future, her desired outcome, and that makes all the difference. Let's keep unpacking this. Emerald describes 2 main orientations. The first orientation is problem-focused, and this is our default. When we focus on problems, our inner state is anxiety. We become reactive. We may feel like we're quote-unquote solving the problems, but often the moves that we're making are just designed to lower our anxiety. And any progress we make tends to be short-lived. We feel like we're on a hamster wheel, working hard, but ending up in the same spot. The second orientation is outcome-focused. When we focus on what we do want, our preferred future, our inner state shifts to passion, energy, and curiosity. And that inner state illuminates small next steps, and those steps accumulate into sustainable progress. It is not easy to shift from being problem-focused to outcome-focused, and it takes true intentionality. Emerald uses a metaphor to explore how challenging it can be to essentially download a new operating system, one that helps us focus on what we want instead of what we don't want. If I asked you right now, in fact, play along if you're somewhere you can, to cross your arms the way you normally would, you wouldn't even have to think about it. But if I asked you to switch the way you cross them by putting the opposite on top, it suddenly feels awkward or clumsy, and you have to pay attention. You have to focus and maybe even practice before it becomes comfortable and natural. That's exactly what it feels like when we're trying to shift from the dominant problem-focused narrative to an outcome-focused life. At first, it's uncomfortable. It takes effort. You're probably going to fumble and slip back. But over time, it becomes more natural because you're literally rewiring your brain for a new way of engaging with your life. Let's try a reflection together right now. Think of something in your life that feels stuck. Maybe it's at work, maybe it's at home. Then take a second to just notice where your mental flashlight is pointed. Is it pointed at the problem, the frustration, maybe the story you've bought into of why this situation is so hard? And then once you've kind of got a handle on that, gently turn the flashlight by asking, what do I actually want in this situation? That is a magic question. It pulls us up from that problem focus into the outcome focus. What do I actually want in this situation? How do I wish for things to go? What would better look like? Notice how your inner state shifts when you sit with these new outcome-focused questions. Pay attention if your body feels different. Are you breathing differently? From this posture, can you imagine even one small step you might take toward what you want to see happen? When I first learned this, it was almost unsettling to me to realize how often I was fueling my own anxiety by staying problem focused. In Emerald's model, he is not suggesting that we ignore the problems. He's just inviting us to interact with the problems from an empowered state instead of a state where we feel like we're just mentally living in the swamp of what isn't working. We acknowledge the problem and then we pivot to putting our focus on the outcome we want. And from there, what's the next step toward my desired outcome? And am I willing to take that step? So to sum it up, where we put our focus shifts our inner state, which drives our behavior, which ultimately creates our lived experience. So let's add even one more layer to this topic of attention management for mental health. This one fascinates me, and it's about how much information our brains take in compared to how much information is available to us. An often quoted stat is that neuroscientists estimate that we're bombarded with about 11 million bits of information every second. But we can only consciously process about 40 to 50 of those bits. When you dig a little deeper, neuroscientists don't agree on the exact numbers. But here's what we do know. Our brains are flooded with far more information every second than we could ever consciously handle. Our conscious mind can work with only a tiny trickle, maybe as few as 10 bits. And some newer research would really point that 40 to 50 bits a second is far too aggressive, that it probably is closer to 10. But the point is not the exact numbers. The point is the contrast. Most of what our brains do is outside of our conscious awareness. And attention is about learning to guide that small stream that we can actually work with. That means that the vast majority of reality, millions of signals, sights, sounds, nuances, never make it into our awareness. Our brains are constantly filtering and deciding what to let in through the doorway of consciousness. There's nothing inherently problematic about this. It's actually a pretty sophisticated design feature. It means we aren't overwhelmed with all the data. But the problem comes in when we're walking around in our lives believing that the few bits of information we perceive represent all the information there is, represent truth with a capital T and the picture in its entirety. Do you ever have a conversation with someone and you cannot fathom how they are experiencing the exact same situation as you, but have a totally different take? Their brain may be zeroing in on an entirely different set of bits than your brain, even though you are in the same conversation. And we can put ourselves in a mental prison if we think that what we perceive is happening is the absolute truth. And then there's no maneuverability, no alternatives, which can feel like an instant hope killer. So here's an important point. The filters that determine what bits we focus on are not neutral. They are shaped by our past experiences, our beliefs, our mood, and even our nervous system state. If I'm feeling anxious, my filter is primed to notice threat. The email I haven't answered, the look on someone's face, a news headline. If I'm feeling grounded, my filter is more likely to include opportunity, kindness, beauty, unity, what we have in common instead of what separates us. And because of something called confirmation bias, we tend to notice the things that reinforce the stories we already believe. We're all walking around in our own version of an echo chamber unless we make conscious decisions to change our relationship with our filter, move away from this sort of automated place to a more intentional experience. Speaking of confirmation bias, if I believe my team doesn't respect me and I'm having a meeting, no matter what all else is happening, I'm going to zero in on that one eye roll in the meeting. If I believe my partner isn't listening, then I'm going to amplify every distracted glance. I may completely miss 10 signals of care and respect happening in those same moments because I'm just picking up the bits that confirm what I already believe. So if you find yourself intrigued with this idea and you're interested in playing with your filters so that more or different information gets through them, here are some powerful questions to experiment with. The first is, what else could be true? One of my favorite questions. What else could be true? Another question, how might I see this if I were in someone else's shoes with different life experiences? Or if I were focused on outcomes instead of problems, what would I notice right now? So let's make this tangible with a quick reflection. Think of a recent situation where you felt frustrated or stuck, and maybe with a colleague or a child or even yourself. And as you're replaying that moment in your head, what snapshots did your brain choose to focus on? And ask yourself, what else could be true? What other snapshots come into view when you think about what might have been happening in that exchange that was outside of your immediate filter? Did you miss a look of concern, a small act of kindness, maybe a hint of someone else's exhaustion or burden? That simple shift does not erase the difficulty, but it gives you more data, and it gives you more compassion, and it gives you more choice. To me, this is such good news because it means that our attention filters aren't fixed. They can be trained. And every time that we pause to ask a wider question, we stretch the edges of what we notice. And over time, our brain gets better at including more nuance, more possibility, and more humanity in our view of what is truth. Now, that's not just about accuracy, it's also about hope. Because when we see more, we have more to work with, more ways to connect, and more paths forward. And that's why radical hope is so tied to attention. Noticing where that flashlight beam goes, noticing what data bits our brain is picking, and holding the question of what our brain might be ignoring or downplaying, and then gently choosing to widen the frame. To me, attention is a lever to access more radical hope. When we reclaim our attention, we reclaim choice, presence, and meaning-making. Viktor Frankl, who survived the Holocaust and is a grandfather of one of our past podcast guests, Alex Vesely, wrote, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom." That space between stimulus and response is shaped by our attention. In that space, we can pivot from problem focus to outcome focus, from a narrow filter to a wider aperture. Radical hope isn't naive. It doesn't deny pain. It says, even here, even now, I can choose where I shine my flashlight. I can widen my frame and my filter, and I can align my own life with what I have determined matters most to me and the people and causes I care about. That choice ripples outward. When we shift our attention, we don't just change our inner state. We change how we show up for our students, our colleagues, our families, and our communities. I'll close with a quote that always grounds me, and it's from Maura Thomas. She says, "Your attention determines the experiences you have, and the experiences you have determine the life you live." You do not have to overhaul everything overnight. Just start with shifting your focus moment by moment, a little more toward presence and a little more toward possibility. Ask one additional question that widens the picture for you. Notice one thing that you're grateful for, even in the midst of something tremendously challenging. Those small shifts in attention accumulate. They change your inner state. They ripple outward. They help you live not just a more focused life, but a more meaningful one. I'm so glad you joined us today. Next time in the series, we're going to do a part 2 of attention management for mental health. And in part 2, we're going to strictly focus on unpacking 10 practical attention management strategies that might serve you in protecting and improving your mental health. If this was useful to you, we would be so grateful if you'll share, rate, and review, and we hope you have a wonderful week. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Oxygen for Educators. Please like, share, and follow, and if inclined, Leave us a 5-star review so that we can keep making content for you. Let us hear from you if you know someone we should interview or a topic we should cover.
The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the guest and host and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization. The content is provided for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended as professional advice. Listeners are encouraged to use their own judgment and seek appropriate professional support when needed. Oxygen for Educators, its host, and production partners are not responsible for any actions taken based on the information shared in this podcast.